Okay, listen.
All the problems rampant in the Predator
Not that, or that. Yes, that.
are indicative of the general decline in quality of horror movies. That is to say, horror movies have lately been getting lazy with their cliches, and 2018 has been no different. This is a sample of all the widely marketed crappy horror movies released in 2018. I've taken the liberty of watching them so you don't have to suffer through them. The Nun,
It's so bad I eagerly anticipated the spree of jump scares to keep me awake.
The First Burge,
All the content ends at the title.
The Slender Man,
Video game characters never learn, and Slender Man is now different.
The Strangers, or as Kevin Mayhew puts it,
No tension, no drama, no interest, no scares, no emotional involvement, and no motive, no chance.
Truth or Dare,
Truth or Dare games are best played.
Winchester,
A freezer stocked with beer, couple of your friends, and you will have fun. Otherwise, you would rather be entertained by the Bible.
Insidious, The Last Key,
A PG-13 rating is wasted on this movie. How else could it have bored my younger sister to death?
The Meg,
Jason is always a treat, but his performance in this movie was so repugnant the mind-numbing script must have bored him during the shooting. It's either that or the moronic director.
The House with a Clock in Its Walls,
The intrigue dies at the title.
The Little Stranger. If Hitler was brought back to be.
I would strap him to a chair and loop this movie until he dies.
Unfriended. I enjoyed it, but The Cloverfield Paradox.
We are gonna need to resurrect the witch-burning laws.
This is another sample of all the equally marketed but better horror movies. Unsane, Annihilation, Hereditary, A Quiet Place.
I couldn't help but click the repeat button after that final scene.
Having spent 2 days of my life I want to get back, here are the problems I've noticed in these movies. Jump scares. The jump scare discussion is a heated one wherever you look. I lean more towards the no jump scares camp, but there's no denying there's plenty to be had from a jump scare. Still, many writers and hack filmmakers fall back on the jump scare in place of real horror. And that's the key theme to note. In place of real horror, there's this fuzzy understanding that sudden loudness equals scary. While that might get the crowd squealing like little girls, true horror is one that is and. This is the thing.
I don't hate jump scares.
I would far prefer, however, they be earned rather than freckled on every horror movie like a nasty rash. The main issue with the jump scares in all the terrible movies I've mentioned is that they are cheaply used. To fully utilize the jump scare, it's best to do one thing before you start it. Build up. Building up can be achieved by having characters vaguely talk about a certain thing or slowly walk towards the dark part of a room with creaky noises in the background. Whatever a writer might do, the $1 million idea here is to give it time and let it cook. The Predator is littered with jump scares, yet it's so ineffective. Unsane is one of the aforementioned movies and it utilizes the jump scare exquisitely. This is the face of Sawyer's stalker and we first meet him in her bank job. A good while later, Sawyer gets duped into signing a contract that binds her to Highland Creek. She argues that she doesn't belong there and that she isn't crazy. Nurse Paulus gives her this sassy
Oh really?
face and Sawyer demands to use the one phone call she has.
There's been some kind of mistake.
By signing this, you've consented to voluntary commitment.
I am being held here against my will.
Do you know how many calls the cops get like that every week?
Those are from crazy people.
The police come to the center but are shown the legally binding contract, so they wander back into the city. Sawyer still hopes the police will come for her. Many hours pass by and the police don't show up. So then she goes berserk after realizing she's going to be trapped there. This jump scare is well earned. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It makes logical sense and there is a 24-minute build up for it. Seriously, I'm not even making that up. There is a 24-minute build up to a 2-second jump scare.
Flawless work.
Most writers think that jump scares means better horror, which isn't the case always. Sometimes it's definitely a factor, which is why you can still find jump. As I said, which is why you can still find jump. Anyhow, which is why you can still find jump scares in well-reviewed movies. Jump scares are effective, but overuse of jump scares and lack of build-up often does more harm than good. Don't explain the horror. The Predator relishes in explaining its horror. What made the first Predator movie excellent was how the monster was kept hidden most of the time. In this movie, the monster is literally in the introduction.
Excuse me, what?
In fact, they take great joy in vomiting out every bit they can about the predator. The best horror lies within our heads, which is a fancy way of saying that things are most scary when our mind is left to gossip, to wonder the beast at hand. What's even more insulting to me as a writer is how its writers, people who are supposedly
Industry experts
think they were being clever by fully, and I repeat, fully showcasing the monster in a slightly dimmed light.
He doesn't look right. He doesn't look scary in the daytime. And so enough people agreed that to a large extent, and then we decided to streamline the plot so we could afford to go back up and really just concentrate on the scarier elements of doing it at night. So literally, as they've said, the difference is night and day.
This fucking problem.
excuse the language, but it's time we get aggressive anyhow.
This fucking problem isn't exclusive to The Predator. It goes deeper into almost every mainstream horror movie. The Purge, generally speaking, is one of those mainstream horror movies that tends to not understand horror. The opening clips in every movie in the series takes joy in explaining the exact reasons why people are being assholes. Every person wants to kill that person or that person or that other motherfucker over there because of such and such and such. I never felt scared while watching The Purge because I knew what horrors to expect, which provided me a feeling of comfort. The audience, no matter what, should never feel comfortable. They should be put in a mystery box and strangled there. So to keep this video from spiraling into
only criticisms and no solutions
bithole, I want to browse a good example of how to utilize the don't show the horror rule for maximum effect. Enter this motherfucker. He was a classical asshole, but I would be damned if he wasn't a good storyteller. I recently finished reading Lovecraft's The Thing on the Doorstep. In fact, I've recently been rereading some of his work, and I have to say the man knew how to scare people. This is the opening line of The Thing on the Doorstep.
It is true that I have sent 6 bullets through the head of my best friend. And yet I hope to show by this statement that I am not his murderer.
I will not link the whole 2-hour audiobook, but instead will give you a quick summary. Edward is a mommy's boy and grows up to be a bookworm. You see, Edward is into some dark shit about cosmic entities, the occult, and dark mythology. He later publishes some books and reaches into adulthood, still a mommy's boy. Edward meets Asenath, one of his female colleagues. They get married after bonding over their love for the occult,
some dark stuff.
Couple years later, Edward, the innocent boy, starts to change in a creepy way. Why he is changing is never revealed, and the narrator of the story, who's also a close friend of Edward, starts to suspect it might be Asenath. The narrator only speculates,
which I think adds to the intrigue and actual horror of the story.
Edward starts driving by himself, but the narrator tells you earlier in the story that Edward could not drive cars. Edward tells the narrator that someone might be using his body, but then in the same conversation orders him to forget what he just said. Later in the story, Edward meets the narrator and tells him he has found a way to stop her from using his body. Even later into the story, Edward calls the narrator and tells him of how he can feel her inside of him. You know some shit is up, but you are never told why until the very end. Turns out Asenath's soul isn't attached to her body, and that when she dies, she can hop from body to body if she isn't cremated. This information isn't divulged in the opening moments like The Purge. Instead, it's revealed at the very end. You should go and give it a read. Enough praise already. The point is that good horror does not need explanation. It needs to be felt, not understood. Most of these trashy horror movies don't capture that magic,
which is why I love The Thing on the Doorstep.
Get me to care about the characters. This one really goes a long way. The Predator's main protagonists are so disconnected from anything anyone could relate to that I honestly found great, crunchy, munchy, drippy, syrupy joy in their death.
Don't you dare touch me! Stand back! No!
Oh yeah!
The writers do nothing to help me empathize with the characters. Further, this is something the original movie tended to do exceptionally well. Say whatever you will, but as I watched the first Predator movie, every time one of those characters even mentioned, considered the idea of splitting up to find the monster, I was like, no. I wanted them to survive so bad, to kill the monster, live through it, and get a happily ever after. None of these sissies did that for me. Moreover, in most of the movies I've mentioned in the first sample, I have often found myself rolling my eyes when one of the supporting characters got their head severed. I simply couldn't give a boo-hoo. I wasn't crying, and I definitely wasn't scared. I was just breathing and blinking, waiting for the timer to run out. In fact, I would constantly check the timer. This is why it matters to give characters normal struggles people face on a daily basis. In Unsane, Sawyer has to deal with a frustrated customer. In A Quiet Place, the father wants to cure his daughter's deafness, however, his daughter hates him. Think about it, a loving father that wants to cure his daughter, a child that is ignorant to an imminent danger, though ignorant with passion. Two human problems that put us deep into the heads of the characters. This is why A Quiet Place is so effective and scary even though they reveal the monster. No matter what, you're always putting yourself in the character's shoes, which means there is a monster coming for you as well. The Predator came out few months at this point, and throughout the whole movie, I didn't feel scared. I was rolling my eyes whenever one of those characters died.
5.
Well, don't go overboard. By don't go overboard, I mean don't mistake horror for gore. The Predator as well as the movies in the first sample tended to go extremely overboard with gruesome visuals. There is so much blood, so many rituals, so many jump scares, so many of everything cliched horror that none of them have value by the end of the movie. If you are writing horror and find that every time the camera turns there's then you should probably consider revising. Think of gruesome scenery as a currency. In the beginning of the movie, that currency has big value because there is no inflation. None of it is printed yet. So when a story starts with a severed head, that severed head is the only scary thing we have seen thus far, and it has maximum impact and it makes us curious and wants us to know more. Say a minute later, another severed head is printed all of a sudden. The impact that the severed heads will have on the reader is chopped. It's not necessarily zero, however, it's low. Now, chopped heads are the norm. Let's play a fun game to explain this. You could start a story with the following line. It was a day like every other until Nicole came back from mowing the lawn and found the head of her son on the dining table, severed from its body. In this line, the severed head has maximum impact on the reader. It gets them asking questions. If I describe another severed head a moment later, the impact drops. In fact, let's do that. It was a day like every other until Nicole came back from mowing the lawn and found the head of her son on the dining table. Her husband came back from work 2 hours after that, only to find Nicole's head next to their son's. 2 days later, the neighbors reported a reeking stench to 911, and when the police walked in, they found the head of the father next to Nicole's. Another call was issued to the police 2 days after that. The caller complained about a worse smell and told the police a different address. When they walked into the house, they counted a total of 15 heads nailed to the walls.
See what I mean?
At first there was one head, now there's what, like 3 plus 15, 18 freaking heads in the span of 6.5 lines? Be smarter and stop at 3 heads. So for recap, horror movies have an issue with cheaply used jump scares, explaining too much, terrible cardboard characters I cannot relate to, and too goddamn much gore. Thanks for watching. Until next time, much love. Have a nice life.